Number 1.
American Heartland. It has been described as a Norman Rockwell painting brought to life. Everyone knows one another there, so there are few street addresses, and even fewer secrets. It is a community in the best sense of the word. Two of its most illustrious citizens were 52-year-old Clarence Roberts and his wife Geneva. But in fall 1970, the couple became embroiled in a firestorm of controversy, betrayal, and murder. On the night of November 18, 1970, a fire raged out of control behind the Roberts' fashionable home. When the ashes had cooled, a body was discovered and identified as Clarence. 10 years later, on November 29, 1980, another fire blazed. Two more bodies were discovered. One was Geneva, and the other was again identified as Clarence. But how could a man die twice? Today, the people of Nashville still wonder what really happened to him. Detective Sergeant Don Custer of the Indiana State Police talked to both detectives that investigated the second fire. Based on what they told him, he believes that Clarence died in the second fire. Clarence's nephew, Bob White, believes that he died in the first fire. Clarence's sister-in-law, Alberta Roberts, believes that he is still alive. The mystery of Clarence's death still haunts those who knew him. In the 1960s, he embodied the American dream. A former sheriff and a board member of the Nashville State Bank, he seemed to have it all. But something went wrong for him. His dreams became twisted into a nightmarish saga that has gone on for decades and still continues today. In the 1960s, Clarence owned a prosperous hardware store along with his brother Carson. He was well respected and seemed to be friends with everyone. He and Carson worked together for about 22 years. Carson recalled that he always seemed happy, enjoyed working, was friendly, and always got along with people. He was a hard worker who put a lot of hours in at the store. Bob recalled that he was very helpful and would help anyone in need. Clarence and Geneva had been married since 1941. She came from a poor family, but together, they rose in Nashville society. With 4 sons and a successful family business, they seemed to be the perfect couple. He soon reached the 33rd degree of the Masons, a rank commemorated by a ring, which he wore proudly. However, his appetite for the good life soon began to consume him. He purchased 3 luxury cars and an expensive and fashionable home. Behind this facade of wealth were heavy debts. Alberta recalled that his personality changed greatly around this time. She described it as turning a light on and turning a light off. To finance his extravagant lifestyle, Clarence sold his hardware business and gambled everything on 2 property investments, an apartment building, and several grain elevators. These investments failed. He also submitted altered and/or fictitious bills to an insurance company regarding the apartment. By fall 1970, he knew that he was in serious trouble. In October, 1 month before the first fire, Sheriff Warren Roberts, Clarence's own brother, repossessed 2 of his vehicles. Clarence and Geneva were left desolate and desperate. Bob recalled that Clarence had become depressed and possibly suicidal around this time. At 6:20 p.m. on the night of November 18, 1970, firemen arrived to find the garage barn of the Roberts home ablaze. The heat was so intense that they stood helplessly by as the structure burned to the ground. When the fire had cooled, they made a grisly discovery. A body, burned beyond recognition, laid beneath the rubble. A half-melted shotgun was by its side. The body was so badly burned, it was difficult to identify it as human. Jack Bond, the county coroner, feared that Clarence had finally paid his debts by taking his own life. When the body was found, Jack assumed that he had shot himself. He figured that he had too many worries in his life, so he decided to commit suicide. When they arrived at the funeral home, they started looking for gunshot wounds. They were surprised to not find any. The police wondered how Clarence's suicide could have been accomplished without a gunshot wound. An autopsy later determined that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, which occurred prior to the fire. Detective Don Custer sifted through the debris. Hidden in the ashes, he found Clarence's Masonic ring. Despite the intense heat, it was virtually undamaged. It was still in excellent shape and did not appear to have been melted. He did not believe that the ring could have withstood the heat of the fire without having any damage to it. He believed that it was planted. This was only the first of a series of unusual discoveries. Investigators learned that only months before the fire, Clarence had purchased several insurance policies on his life, totaling close to $1 million. The policies named Geneva as the beneficiary. He also told a friend that he had more than $100,000 in a Swiss bank account. He even showed the friend his card for the account. In addition, a test showed that the body found in the blaze had type AB blood. Clarence's blood type was B, based on records from the U.S. Army. If it was not the body of Clarence, then who died in the fire? On November 17, 2 days before the blaze, Clarence was spotted in a bar in the nearby community of Morgantown, also in Brown County, befriending a vagrant. The man was described as about 5'7" to 5'9", and was about the same age as Clarence. The two were together, but Clarence apparently did not know his name. He told the man that he had some odd jobs at his house that needed done. The man agreed to go with him. As they were leaving, the man collapsed from some unknown cause. Clarence said that he would take the man to the hospital. Detective Custer later checked all of the hospitals within a 300-mile radius and found that the man had not been admitted to any of them. Two theories divided Nashville, one that Clarence had killed himself, and another that he murdered the vagrant in order to collect the insurance money. It is even claimed he watched from the woods as the flames destroyed the evidence of his crime. Bob believes that Clarence was suicidal. However, he does not believe that he was homicidal. Alberta, on the other hand, believes that he was definitely capable of murder. Clarence was either dead or missing. As a result, Geneva was left alone. Her fortune changed dramatically from riches back to rags. She was forced to move to an old home on Robert's family property on the outskirts of town. Her claims to the insurance money were repeatedly denied. She also tried to have Clarence declared dead. However, the judge denied the request, citing insufficient evidence. She was not alone in maintaining that Clarence had died in the first fire. Dr. John Pless, a prominent pathologist, agreed with her. In 1978, attorneys came to him to review the reports of the experts who had examined the evidence. Through this process, he proved to himself and several others that the body found in the garage belonged to Clarence. Dr. Pless testified at the civil trial against the insurance companies that he felt that it was highly probable that the body was Clarence's. Despite his testimony, Geneva lost all of her appeals. Dr. Pless felt that those on Geneva's side were decimated emotionally by the judge's ruling. Dr. Pless could not understand why the judge had made the ruling. The denials took their toll on Geneva. Withdrawing from her friends and neighbors, she became the subject of local gossip. In order to make ends meet, Geneva had to take a job in the kitchen of the local Howard Johnson's restaurant. Then, the rumors began. Local shopkeepers said that they had sold her large quantities of beer. This was surprising, considering she was diabetic and seldom drank beer. Some said she was not alone, and neighbors began to report seeing someone on the grounds of her home. Detective Dave Anderson developed information that a man had been seen behind her residence. The man acted very strangely and never let anyone get close to him. He would always duck away from them and head back toward the home immediately. Detective Anderson and several other officers set up surveillance of the home. They were there for approximately 3 days and nights. They photographed everyone who came and went in and around the home. However, they never saw the man. Despite this, they believed that the man was Clarence. They speculated that he had run out of places to go and decided to come back and stay with Geneva. The local reporter, Helen Ayers, had grown friendly with Geneva. Helen felt that she was hiding something or someone. Helen visited the home on 4 different occasions. Geneva always met her on the back porch and never invited her inside. This was especially strange because it was a common courtesy in Nashville to invite someone inside when they came to visit. Helen suspected that a man was living there with her. Helen interviewed Clarence's sister who lived in the adjacent yard. She said that she could hear Geneva talking to a man. Surprisingly, she said that it was not Clarence's voice. Nobody knows for certain what Geneva was trying to hide, or whom. Her reclusive life went on uneventfully until the night of November 29, 1980, when her house caught on fire. Detective Anderson arrived at the scene soon after. The fire was still burning very intensely at that time. After the fire was extinguished, he stayed behind, curious as to what would be found. The house had been totally demolished. Sifting through the ashes, searchers found Geneva's body. They removed it and sent it to the funeral home. Hours later, they made another shocking discovery. A second body in another part of the house. When Dr. Pless reviewed the chest X-ray of the body, he immediately recognized it as belonging to Clarence. The body was soon positively identified as his. Dr. Pless and detectives had the difficult task of telling everyone that Clarence was dead for the second time. The second fire was a clear-cut case of arson. Detectives could clearly follow the burn patterns from Geneva's bed into the adjacent room, where Clarence's body was located, and then down a hallway and out the back door of the house. Based on the evidence, they determined that Geneva had been murdered. They are certain that turpentine was used to ignite the fire. However, they do not know who started it. Clarence or a third party. Detective Anderson believes that a third party was responsible. Investigators had no clue as to who set the second fire, but they believe they have identified the victim. Detective Anderson is convinced that the second victim in the second fire was Clarence. Dr. Pless is also convinced of that, based on the medical evidence. He now believes that a vagrant died in the first fire. Bob, however, does not believe that the victim in the second fire was Clarence. He and Carson believe that the victim was the unknown man that had been seen at Geneva's house. Today, in Greenlawn Cemetery, the mystery of Clarence Roberts lies buried, still defying explanation after decades. Who was the man in the first fire? Who set the second fire and why? Who was the mysterious figure seen at Geneva's house, and why did she hide his identity? And the key question, where is Clarence? Is he in the grave of the 1980 victim? Some family members are doubtful, and they protested when a headstone with his name was put in place. Whoever it is that rests beneath this Midwestern earth will never tell his tale. Suspects. Regarding the first fire, it was believed that Clarence either committed suicide or killed a vagrant and set him on fire in the garage barn. He had been seen with a vagrant in another town shortly before the fire. His Masonic ring, found in the ashes of the garage, did not appear to have been damaged by the fire. Furthermore, blood tests indicated that the body had type AB blood, while Clarence had type B. Other evidence indicated that Clarence was not the one killed in the first fire. A tooth discovered near the body was identified as a lower right second molar. Clarence's lower right second molar had been removed several years prior to the fire. His cousin Charles reported seeing him less than half an hour prior to the fire. He was wearing a solid blue shirt at the time. The body was later found with a brown plaid shirt. Witnesses reported that the vagrant was wearing a brown plaid shirt. Witnesses also said they saw Clarence and the man together on 2 occasions before the fire and the day of the fire. An autopsy determined that the first victim died of carbon monoxide prior to the start of the fire. The bank later repossessed Clarence's truck. They discovered holes in the exhaust system, apparently made by a hammer or similar instrument. Evidence also indicated that Clarence was still alive following the first fire. Several witnesses reported seeing a mysterious man at Geneva's home throughout the 1970s. Insurance investigator William Mitchell received reports of Clarence living in New Mexico, and West Germany. Robert Hillenberg, a former Nashville resident who moved to New Mexico, reported seeing him in Las Palmas, Mexico, in 1975. Other acquaintances reported seeing him in various locations in 1972, 1974, and 1975. Regarding the second fire, there are several possible theories. One is that Clarence murdered Geneva and an unknown man, before setting the house on fire and fleeing. Another theory is that Clarence and Geneva committed suicide together, so that their children could cash in on their life insurance. Yet another theory is that Clarence killed Geneva, and then committed suicide, or died accidentally. One final theory is that Clarence and Geneva were killed by an unknown third party. Investigators looked into the possibility that Clarence had help either with his apparent murderous schemes, or while he was on the run. However, in 1983, a Brown County grand jury declined to charge anyone with helping him. The original air date of the segment is December 14, 1988. The segment mistakenly states that the second fire occurred on November 18, 1980. The judge shown in the segment was an actual Brown County magistrate who adjudicated the lawsuit between the insurance company and the real Geneva Roberts. He reprised his ruling in the reenacted court case, telling the actress playing Geneva Roberts that she has lost her case and recommending appellate action. Results: unresolved. Authorities are certain that the second body found in the second fire belonged to Clarence. X-rays and dental records from Clarence matched the body. In regards to the 1980 fire, a grand jury determined that Geneva was either murdered or passed out from alcohol consumption or a diabetic coma, and that Clarence died accidentally while setting the fire. They believe that he passed out either from alcohol consumption or from the fire's fumes. His blood alcohol level was 0.2, while hers was 0.3. Authorities are also certain that Clarence was responsible for the murder of the first victim. In fact, a grand jury indicted him for kidnapping and murder in 1975. However, the victim's identity remains a mystery. Authorities looked into the possibility that the first victim was a 38-year-old drifter from Kentucky named James Woodrow Hatcher, who vanished in 1968. However, X-rays of James' body were not a match to the victim.
Number 2.
On April 6, 1995, Todd and Tommy Carroll went to the hospital, awaiting the birth of their third child. They were worried, however, because their second one, Megan, had been stillborn. Tests and an ultrasound were done on Tommy. Everything appeared to be normal. Her obstetrician, Dr. Diana Oken, induced labor at 8:45 a.m. The contractions grew stronger and more frequent throughout the day. By 4:30 p.m., birth was imminent. The fetal monitor showed a normal heartbeat. However, as Tommy began to push, it began to go down. At 4:42 p.m., the moment Logan was born, his heart rate plunged to 0. Dr. Oken began to have CPR done on Logan. Doctors and an emergency team rushed to the room. They tried desperately to save his life. For 15 minutes, they continued the CPR process. However, no heartbeat was found, and there was no signs of brain activity. He was pronounced dead at 5:15 p.m. Todd and Tommy agreed to an autopsy, hoping for some explanation. As the doctors and nurses took pictures of Logan with his family, Tommy's sister heard a gasping noise from him, but the doctors claimed it was a reflex. 40 minutes after his death, Tommy's stepmother was holding him when she realized that he was getting warmer and that he may still be alive. A nurse soon came in and realized that Logan had a heart rate. Soon, Dr. Oken determined that he was alive after all. Even though 6 doctors and 8 nurses believed that he was dead, somehow, he had lived. Everyone was shocked how within a few hours he was a healthy baby. To this day, nobody could determine how he was able to come back from death. This case first aired on the November 3, 1995 episode. It was also featured on It's a Miracle. No one has yet explained how Logan revived. He suffered from brain damage and was confined to a wheelchair for the remainder of his life. Despite this, he lived a happy life with his family and attended school. Sadly, he passed away in January 2020 at the age of 24.
Number 3.
This is my first time posting in this forum. I hope this post is okay as I'm not the most eloquent person, and this is not a case I have researched, just one that interested me. I just listened to this case on the Vanished podcast, and it really struck me as there's so little information about the disappearance. Bradley Dale Ross II, 25, was last seen in Fort Wayne, Indiana on November 19, 2004. He was meant to pick his fiancée up from work in her car, but never showed up. Later that day the car was in a 2-car crash, and a man was seen running from the vehicle, though it is not known if this was Bradley. He has not been seen since. Bradley did not have a driver's license at the time. Several empty beer cans were found in the bottom of the car. His fiancée at the time was pregnant with his second child. Not sure if the first child was also with her or not. The podcast didn't say. The police did not search for the driver of the car after the accident. There have been several unproven sightings of Bradley since his disappearance. The car was never searched by police. The fiancée was able to go and get it from the impound place. When the police told the fiancée her car had been involved in a crash, she said her roommate must have stolen it. However, she only lived with Bradley. Was he trying to cover for him, since she had no license? Was he trying to cover for someone else? Bradley had been drink driving and fled to avoid getting a DUI, in trouble for driving without a license. But where is he now? I haven't checked the area out, so don't know if it's near any water, etc., that an intoxicated person could have fallen into. Note, I did actually just try and look up the area of the crash. It is not right next to water, but there is water in the vicinity. If I got the right intersection, there's a river 2.5 kilometers away. Bradley got a head injury in the accident and became confused, disorientated, and wandered off. He is still alive and unaware of who he is, perhaps living on the street somewhere. Bradley was not driving the car. The driver had done something to Bradley and stolen the car. They ran to avoid being caught in a car that did not belong to them. The podcast placed a lot of suspicion on the fiancé. Apparently she moved away shortly after his disappearance and does not want anything to do with the case now. She is married. I think this is a bit harsh as she was pregnant at the time and could be trying to keep her pregnancy as low stress as possible. It's understandable to me that she moved back to her family, who could comfort and support her at this time. However, it is possible that she is involved in his disappearance. There are unconfirmed rumors that both parties were cheating. Did her boyfriend get rid of Bradley? Was he driving at the time of the disappearance? I'm interested to know what others think of this case. I'm a bit stumped. If Bradley was driving the car, which is personally the direction I'm leaning in, I'd lean towards the head injury idea, in which case he could still be alive today. Alternatively, and unfortunately probably more likely, he could have succumbed to the elements. I'm not sure how cold it would have been, or met his death some other way, e.g. injuries from the crash, falling into water. If someone else was driving, I really don't know what to think, other than he is probably dead through foul play.
Number 4.
Garth Rector was a 48-year-old man who was found murdered in his home Indiana home on 21 March 2008. Garth was a married man with a teenage daughter. However, at the time he was murdered, he was separated from his wife Angie. He was renting a home in Cowan, Indiana, where he was found. Garth is described by family members as having a midlife crisis with a history of extramarital affairs. Lee initially stated his murder was not random, rather a targeted killing. Burglary was ruled out as nothing was taken, including several $100s in Garth's wallet. Later, Lee stated burglary is a possibility. After receiving a tip, it was the result of a burglary. There allegedly were signs of forced entry at the back door. Lee stated there are 4 boys. I believe the 4 boys are 2 women and 2 men. The rental home he lived in was owned by a lady who lived on the same property, located 200 feet apart. He had dated this woman. The landlady had recently broke off an engagement from a long-term boyfriend. The long-term boyfriend is described as an older man and an avid collector of guns. He reportedly never missed work, but did the day Garth was murdered. He reportedly took the breakup very hard. The other 2 people, I believe, are a man and woman with whom Garth was having an affair. They worked together at Ball State University. The day he was found, he was supposed to be leaving for a trip to California to join his wife, daughter, and family. The trip was described as a reconciliation effort between the couple. Obviously, all these 4 people have motivation, jealousy. The women were probably not happy about his reconciliation. The men were not happy about Garth's involvement with their women. This murder screams crime of passion. He was shot 5 times. A witness reported a car backed out from Garth's driveway, speeding away, almost hitting a school bus. The landlady's story is very suspicious to me. Garth was not dating her any longer. Yet, she was aware of his exact travel plans that day. Reportedly stating in the early morning hours she noticed his lights were not on when he should have been packing. She entered his home and called 911 after discovering him. The landlady has the best motive coupled with opportunity. She was likely emotionally distraught over the breakup, furious over his reconciliation, and was not going to allow him to go to California. I don't believe he was shot when he arrived home in the early afternoon. He had a BAC of .11 according to toxicology report. I also don't think it was a burglary, and the tip was a red herring. I believe he left later that evening, went to have a couple beers and picked up groceries, arriving home much later. I just don't see a guy leaving work at 1 p.m., going somewhere to consume a few beers, picking up groceries and arriving home before 3 p.m. The groceries were dropped a few feet from the front door. His body was discovered in the kitchen. In 2016, the prosecutor stated the killer is someone well connected to Garth, and there was a lot of emotion involved in the murder. These statements completely void the burglary angle for me. What do you think happened? Who do you think killed Garth?
Number 5.
In July of 1980, motorcyclist Robert Davidson was on his way to visit his daughter in Indianapolis after his father's death, and his route took him along I-74 and past Acton, Indiana. As he passed by the area of Acton Campground, an ominous thunderstorm sprang up out of nowhere. Rain slashed down and thunder reverberated through the sky. Davidson pulled his bike over and began to retrieve some rain gear he had packed. As he did this, a bolt of lightning came hurtling down to strike him in the chest with such force that it allegedly sent him flying right out of his boots and left a gaping, smoking wound behind. When witnesses called it in and paramedics arrived, he was sprawled out in the relentless rain, totally still and seemingly dead. It turned out that he was still barely alive, but considering the blast of lightning he had sustained, and his vital signs, even as paramedics tried to revive him, it was not thought he would survive his ordeal. Finally, his pulse faded, and his heart completely stopped, and it seemed as if he was truly gone. That was when something very strange indeed would happen. According to witnesses at the scene, as well as the three paramedics, Randy Niebert, Kimberly Cobb, and Mary Lou Schaefer, through the rain, came a woman dressed in a long black Victorian-era dress, and with flowing black hair, who approached the scene and stood over the fallen Davidson as everyone wondered who this stranger was. The ambulance also purportedly lost power as she approached, and some other witnesses would later claim that there had been a strange static quality to the air or a cold chill. In her hand she held a Bible, and after looking down solemnly at the dying man she suddenly spoke, telling the paramedics that she knew what to do, and that she could save him, begging them, "I must touch him. Let me touch him." The paramedics were too startled to have even comprehended what was going on before the woman supposedly knelt down next to Davidson, and began reciting the 23rd Psalm, and what sounded like gibberish, while pounding the ground over and over again with her Bible before lightly tapping the fallen man in the chest with it. She then stood, held her Bible up above her head, and, as some witnesses would say, spoke in tongues, before calmly walking off to leave the paramedics just staring open-mouthed and dumbfounded next to their supposedly dead patient. One of the paramedics would happen to make the observation that although it was still pouring rain, the lady in black did not seem to be wet. The lady sort of vanished into the growing crowd of onlookers, and the ambulance suddenly jumped to life once again, startling the paramedics, but even more startling still was when Davidson suddenly gasped for air. He was rushed to the hospital emergency room, where he would fall into a coma, but eventually make a full recovery, displaying no side effects or brain damage at all from his harrowing ordeal, and leaving doctors totally stumped. They could not figure out how he had been resuscitated from having no heartbeat, let alone why the lightning hadn't killed him, or how he had managed to emerge from it in perfect health. It was an oddity. After this, attention turned to the mysterious lady in black who had been witnessed, and oddly, while many had seen her, including the paramedics, some in the crowd claimed that they had seen no such lady, pushing it all further into weirdness. There have been many theories on who the mysterious woman could have been. For some, she is a restless spirit from the days of the spiritual retreat. In other theories, she was an angel, descending on this occasion for whatever reasons to save this man. Others still have said that she was the spirit of one of the victims of one of the many fires that had torn through here, or even the ghost of a Native American, although this is a bit of a stretch, since she was clearly described as being in Victorian-era clothing. Another idea still is that this was the spirit of a certain ghost seen in the immediate vicinity from time to time, said to be that of a woman who once lived in the area, and used to always dress in the exact same type of long black dress. A similar black dress has since been donated by a descendant of the woman. The curious case of Robert Davidson has gone on to be debated and featured on TV shows such as Unsolved Mysteries, but we are not really any closer to finding true answers. Whether it was the ghosts of the pasts, an angel, or just illusions, something brought that man back from certain death. What that may have been, no one knows, and it remains a mysterious anomaly and a medical miracle.